Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled people story. What do you do when an HOA shuts off your water to force compliance? But you're not even in their HOA. That's not a metaphor. That's my Tuesday morning. I followed the paper trail, checked my cameras, and within 24 hours, someone's story started falling apart. The question is, whose name was on the evidence? So here's the background. I live in what people around here call a pioneer house. It's this old place built back in 1954 on about 2 acres of land. When my grandfather first bought it, this whole area was basically farmland and scattered rural properties. Over the years, developers started buying up the surrounding land and built this fancy neighborhood called the Pines. Real cookie-cutter stuff with identical houses, perfect lawns, and an HOA that makes the Taliban look reasonable. The thing is, my property was never annexed into their association. My house sits right in the middle of their development like some kind of holdout, which I guess technically I am. The developers tried to buy my land when my grandfather passed and left it to me, but I wasn't interested. I love the old place, love the big lot, and I especially love that I can do whatever I want on my own property. One of the things I do is restore vintage trucks. I've got this 1967 Chevy that I'm working on in my driveway. It's not some rusted out piece of junk either. I've spent 3 years getting the engine rebuilt, the bodywork done, and it's actually pretty beautiful if you ask me. But apparently it's an eyesore according to the HOA president, who I'll call Karen because, well, if you met her you'd understand why. Karen is something else. She drives around the neighborhood in this golf cart wearing what looks like a security guard vest that says patrol on it. She's got her blonde hair pulled back in this tight bun and carries a clipboard like it's some kind of weapon. The woman takes her job as HOA president more seriously than most people take their actual careers. Now, I've always been what you might call a documentation nerd. I keep records of everything, every receipt, every letter, every conversation that matters. My dad was in insurance and he drilled into me that paperwork saves your butt. So, when I started getting these violation notices from the Pines HOA, I documented every single one. The first notice showed up about 6 months ago. It was taped to my front door and claimed I was in violation of community standards for having an inoperable vehicle in my driveway. The truck runs fine, by the way. I just don't drive it every day because it's a restoration project. The notice demanded I remove the vehicle within 30 days or face escalating fines. I thought it was some kind of mistake, so I wrote a polite letter explaining that I wasn't a member of their HOA. I sent it certified mail, got the signature confirmation, the whole deal. I even attached copies of my property deed and the original 1954 survey showing my land boundaries. I figured that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. The next notice came 2 weeks later. This time, it wasn't just about the truck. They were claiming I owed 5 years of unpaid HOA dues totaling just over $5,000. $5,000 for an HOA I was never part of. The notice was more aggressive too, threatening legal action and utility-based disciplinary measures. I called the HOA management company to try to sort this out over the phone. The woman who answered was nice enough, but when I explained the situation, she told me she'd have to transfer me to Karen directly since she was handling my case personally. Karen's response was basically that I was lying. She told me that every property in the Pines development was part of the HOA and that my claims about not being a member were just an attempt to avoid paying my fair share. When I mentioned the certified letter I'd sent with the property documents, she said she never received it, which was weird because I had the signature confirmation right in front of me. The conversation went nowhere fast. Karen kept interrupting me, kept insisting I was wrong, and finally hung up on me when I asked for the HOA's legal justification for claiming authority over my property. That's when the notices started coming more frequently. Every few days, there'd be something new taped to my door. Violation for non-conforming landscaping because I have vegetable gardens instead of just grass. Violation for unauthorized signage because I have a small vintage Coca-Cola sign by my garage. Violation for failure to maintain approved exterior paint colors, even though my house is the same white it's been for probably 20 years. Each notice was more threatening than the last. They started mentioning specific sections of their covenants and bylaws, threatening fines that would accrue daily, and warning about legal action. The final notice was different, though. It was hand-delivered on a Wednesday morning, and instead of being taped to the door, it was stuck under my windshield wiper. The notice said that since I refused to follow the rules of the community, they would be forced to take utility-based disciplinary action, effective immediately. It was signed by Karen herself, and had an official-looking stamp on it. I remember staring at that notice thinking, what the hell does utility-based disciplinary action even mean? But I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. The next morning I found out exactly what it meant. I was in the middle of my morning shower when the water just stopped. 1 second I'm rinsing shampoo out of my hair, the next second nothing. Not even a trickle. I stood there with soap in my eyes thinking maybe it was just a pressure drop or something, but after a few minutes it was clear the water wasn't coming back. I threw on some clothes and went outside to check if it was a neighborhood-wide issue. Nope. I could see sprinklers running in the yards across the street. The fancy fountain in the HOA common area was working just fine. It was just my house. That's when I walked down to the curb to check my water meter. What I found there made my blood boil. Someone had padlocked the water meter box shut with this heavy-duty chain and lock. There was even a little tag on it that said property of HOA in Karen's handwriting. I was standing there looking at this lock when I heard the whir of an electric motor behind me. I turned around and there was Karen in her golf cart, pulling up to the curb with this smug look on her face. She climbed out of the cart and walked over like she was about to deliver some great piece of wisdom. She was wearing her patrol vest and had that clipboard tucked under her arm. "Well," she said, looking at the locked meter box, "I see you found our solution to your compliance problem." I just stared at her. "You locked my water meter?" "The water stays off until the truck is gone and your check for $5,000 clears," she said. "This could have all been avoided if you just followed the rules like everyone else." Now, I'll admit my first instinct was to start yelling, but then I remembered something my grandfather used to tell me about dealing with bullies. He said the best way to handle someone who thinks they have power over you is to let them prove they don't. So instead of arguing, I pulled out my phone and started recording. "I just want to make sure I understand this correctly," I said. "You're telling me that you personally locked my water meter to force me to remove my truck and pay money to your HOA? Karen's smug expression flickered for just a second, but then she doubled down. "That's exactly what I'm telling you. This is what happens when residents refuse to comply with community standards." "And you have the authority to do this how exactly?" I asked, still recording. "I'm the HOA president," she said, like that explained everything. "It's my job to enforce compliance." I nodded and kept the camera rolling. "So to be clear, you're claiming authority over my property and my utilities based on your position as president of an HOA that I'm not a member of?" That's when her confidence started to crack a little. "You are too a member. Every property in this development is part of the HOA. I hope you have that in writing," I said, and stopped recording. Karen got back in her golf cart and drove off, but not before telling me that the water would stay off until I came to my senses. As soon as she left, I called the municipal water district. When I explained what had happened, the woman on the phone was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my day. "Ma'am, what you're describing is a felony. No private organization has the authority to tamper with city water infrastructure." The water district technician arrived about 2 hours later. His name was Mike, and he was not happy about what he found. Apparently, the water meter and the shutoff valve are city property, and messing with them without authorization is a big deal. Mike cut the lock off and restored my water service, but he also took pictures of everything and filled out what he called a tampering report. While Mike was working, I decided to check my security cameras. I've got a pretty good system set up around the property, and sure enough, the cameras caught everything. At exactly 6:03 a.m. that morning, a guy in an HOA maintenance truck pulled up to my curb. He got out with bolt cutters, opened my meter box, did something inside it, and then locked it shut with the chain. The best part was that I recognized the guy. It was Karen's husband. I'd seen him around the neighborhood before, always driving the HOA maintenance truck or following Karen around in a second golf cart. On the video, you could clearly see him looking around to make sure no one was watching before he messed with my meter. But here's where it gets really interesting. While I was reviewing the security footage, Mike the water tech made an observation that I hadn't thought of. He said my water line runs off a completely different main than the rest of the development. Since my house predates the Pines by about 60 years, my service connects to an older main that runs down the main road, while all the newer houses connect to a separate system that was installed when the development was built. That's weird that they'd even be able to shut you off, Mike said. Your service isn't connected to theirs at all. That got me thinking. I pulled out the original survey documents and the utility easement paperwork from when my grandfather built the house. Sure enough, my property has what's called independent utility access with recorded easement rights that date back to 1954. The HOA infrastructure was built around my property, not integrated with it. By the time Mike left, I had a plan. Instead of just calling the police and making a big scene, I decided to let Karen hang herself with her own rope. That afternoon, I called the non-emergency police line to report utility tampering. I explained the whole situation to the officer who took the report, and he said a detective would be in touch within 24 hours to review the evidence. But before the police got involved, I wanted to see just how far Karen was willing to dig her own hole. See, a few years back, I joined the HOA's online community group just for the entertainment value. It's one of those neighborhood apps where people complain about everything from barking dogs to teenagers walking too loudly. I never posted anything, but I like to read the drama. So that evening I made my first and only post in the group. I wrote, "Hi everyone, does anyone know why my water got shut off today? I'm worried about my vintage truck project. The radiator needs to stay filled or the engine could get damaged." I posted it and waited. It took exactly 12 minutes for Karen to respond, and boy did she respond. Corrective measures are being taken against non-compliant residents who refuse to follow community standards, she wrote. The water service will be restored once all violations are resolved and outstanding dues are paid in full. Then came the replies. Other neighbors started asking what was going on, what violations, what dues. Karen kept responding, getting more and more specific about the HOA's authority to enforce compliance through utility management and how some residents think they can ignore the rules that everyone else has to follow. The whole conversation was public, and Karen was basically confessing to everything in writing. She even bragged about how the HOA had multiple tools for ensuring compliance and how utility access is a privilege that comes with community membership. I screenshot everything, of course. The next morning, two things happened almost simultaneously. Detective Rodriguez called me about the utility tampering report, and I got a call from the water district supervisor, a guy named Tom, who wanted to follow up on Mike's report. I ended up meeting both of them at my house around 10 a.m. I showed them the security footage, the series of violation notices, the certified mail records proving I'd informed the HOA that I wasn't a member, and the screenshots from the community group where Karen had publicly admitted to shutting off my water. Detective Rodriguez was particularly interested in the video of Karen's husband tampering with the meter. Apparently, utility tampering is considered a Class C felony in our state when it involves shutting off service to a residence. It's treated the same as cutting someone's power or gas lines. Tom from the water district was mainly concerned about the liability issues. He explained that when a private organization interferes with municipal utilities, it creates all kinds of legal problems for the city. The water district has insurance and regulatory requirements, and when someone else starts messing with their infrastructure, it opens them up to lawsuits. "We're going to have to file a formal complaint against the HOA, Tom told me. This kind of tampering can result in fines up to $50,000. That afternoon, I got a call from a lawyer, not just any lawyer, but one who specializes in HOA disputes. Apparently, word was getting around about what had happened, and this guy had heard about it through some mutual contacts. His name was Mr. Peterson, and he explained that what the HOA had done wasn't just illegal, it was stupid. Shutting off utilities to force compliance is considered constructive eviction, he said. It's illegal even when a landlord does it to an actual tenant. When an HOA does it to someone who isn't even a member, it's a slam-dunk civil rights violation. Peterson offered to take my case on contingency, meaning I wouldn't pay anything unless we won. He was confident we could get significant damages for what he called deprivation of basic services and harassment under color of authority. I decided to hire him on the spot. The fun really started the next day when Peterson sent a formal demand letter to the HOA. The letter laid out everything that had happened, attached copies of all my documentation, and demanded immediate resolution. But more than that, it explained exactly why the HOA had no legal authority over my property. The letter included a complete property history showing that my land was never part of the original development plan. It had survey documents proving my boundaries, utility records showing independent service connections, and copies of the original 1954 deed with its metes and bounds description. Peterson also included something called a chain of title report that traced ownership of my property back to when it was first carved out of a larger farm tract. Most importantly, the letter explained that under state law, HOA authority can only be established through recorded covenants that run with the land. Since my property was never subject to any HOA covenants, the association had absolutely no legal basis for claiming authority over my land or my utilities. The demand letter gave the HOA 72 hours to respond with a formal apology and an offer of financial compensation for damages. Karen's response came in less than 24 hours, and it was exactly what Peterson had hoped for. Instead of backing down or consulting with a lawyer, Karen sent back a letter that essentially doubled down on everything. She claimed that my property was grandfathered into the HOA when the development was built around it. She insisted that my failure to pay dues was theft of services since I benefited from the HOA's common area maintenance. Most amazingly, she claimed that the HOA had emergency authority to shut off utilities when residents posed community hazards through non-compliance. Peterson called me as soon as he got Karen's response. He was practically laughing when he read it to me over the phone. "This woman has just handed us the best possible evidence for our case," he said. "She's not only admitting to everything we accused her of, she's trying to justify it with legal theories that don't exist." That's when Peterson filed our lawsuit. We sued the HOA as an organization, Karen personally, and her husband for the utility tampering. We asked for actual damages, punitive damages, attorney fees, and something called injunctive relief to prevent them from bothering me again. The lawsuit was filed on a Friday. By Monday morning, the HOA had hired their own lawyer, and suddenly, Karen's tune changed completely. Their lawyer called Peterson and basically begged for a settlement conference. Apparently, once a real attorney looked at the facts, it became clear that the HOA was in serious legal trouble. The settlement negotiations were interesting. The HOA's lawyer kept trying to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that Karen had acted without board authorization, that they were willing to make a small payment to make it go away. Peterson wasn't having any of it. He pointed out that Karen was the HOA president acting in her official capacity, that the board was legally responsible for her actions, and that the HOA's insurance company was probably going to be very unhappy about having to cover this kind of liability. The breaking point came when the Water District filed their own enforcement action against the HOA. The fine for utility tampering ended up being $25,000, and the Water District demanded that the HOA install new security measures around all meter boxes in the development to prevent future tampering. That's when the other homeowners in the Pines started paying attention. See, HOA fines and legal costs get passed through to the members as special assessments. When word got out that everyone's dues were going to go up to pay for Karen's legal blunders, the neighbors were not happy. I actually felt a little bad for the regular homeowners. Most of them were decent people who just wanted to live in a nice neighborhood. They had no idea that their HOA president was running around playing utility police on property that wasn't even in their jurisdiction. The HOA called an emergency board meeting to discuss the lawsuit. According to the meeting minutes, which became public record once the litigation started, it was not a pleasant meeting. Several homeowners demanded Karen's resignation, and there was talk of removing the entire board. But by then, it was too late to just make Karen go away. The legal damage was done, and Peterson was pushing hard for a settlement that would actually mean something. In the end, we settled for $15,000. The HOA paid my attorney fees, covered the cost of the hotel I'd had to stay in while the water was off, 3 nights at a pretty nice place, and agreed to a permanent injunction prohibiting any future contact with me or interference with my property. The settlement also required the HOA to send a formal letter to all members clarifying that my property was never part of the association and that I had no obligations to comply with their rules or pay their dues. Karen resigned as HOA president 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized. Apparently, the homeowners voted to remove her at the next board meeting anyway, but she quit first. The really satisfying part came about 6 months later when Karen and her husband put their house up for sale. I heard through the neighborhood gossip, yeah, I still follow that community group, that they couldn't afford the special assessments that the HOA levied to cover all the legal costs and fines from the utility tampering incident. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to build a beautiful new garage for my vintage truck. It's a nice big building with proper ventilation, heating, and enough space to work on multiple projects. And just because I could, I had it painted this bright blue color that would definitely violate the HOA's architectural standards if I were actually subject to them. The truck restoration is coming along great, by the way. I've got the engine running smooth as silk, and I'm working on the interior now. Sometimes I take it for drives around the neighborhood just to remind everyone that I can park whatever I want in my own driveway. I still get the occasional dirty look from some of the neighbors, but most people have moved on. There's a new HOA board, and they seem to understand property boundaries a lot better than Karen did. The funniest thing happened about a year later when some new neighbors moved in down the street. They were having a conversation about the neighborhood rules, and one of them pointed at my house and said something about that place that's not in the HOA. It's become a local landmark, I guess. The pioneer house that fought the HOA and won. I'm honestly glad the whole thing happened, even though it was a massive hassle at the time. It taught me a lot about standing up for your rights and the importance of keeping good records. It also reminded me why my grandfather loved this old place so much. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just hold your ground and let the bullies prove they don't have the power they think they do. These days I spend most of my time working on the truck and tending my vegetable garden. I've even started a small hobby of collecting vintage signs to decorate my garage. Karen probably wouldn't approve, but then again, Karen doesn't get a vote anymore. The HOA still exists, and they still enforce their rules for the people who actually live in their development. But they've learned to stay in their lane, and I've learned that sometimes the best defense against unreasonable people is a good paper trail and the willingness to let them dig their own holes. I never did get an apology from Karen, but watching her pack up that moving truck was satisfaction enough. And my vintage truck, it's beautiful, runs like a dream, looks like $1 million, and it sits in my driveway whenever I damn well please, because this is America, and a man's home is his castle, even when it's surrounded by people who think they know better. The next one is a malicious compliance story, so I am telling this story because the friend involved recently died from a short but valiant battle with cancer. She went from the doctor saying, well, we need to do a biopsy, it's probably nothing, to a call from her 5 weeks later saying she was going into hospice care with just a few days to live. But saying goodbye brought up some tough memories, and a funny one. I decided to go to a meetup a different friend from work suggested I might enjoy. A tiki club that met weekly, but not only at tiki bars. 50s-style diners were also part of the club. It was at a local dessert place with a 50s diner flair that also served some good coffee. I think this is my second or third meetup with them, and it is a good group. Several of them rode motorcycles or even Vespa scooters, as I did, an old 70s Honda CB55044. I sit down with my coffee and am talking with one of the guys who just bought a new Triumph Bonneville when someone comes up to the table, sits down and takes drink of my coffee. What the actual HOA? I look over, and it was, to my utter astonishment, Wayward. Wayward, which was her nickname, was an old girlfriend. We had a short but enjoyable summer together after I graduated from high school and she was working before going off to college. She went off to college, me to the Navy, and we lost track of each other. This being the days before the internet. I had been married for 15 years at this point and had a child. While she was single, it was a strange but platonic friendship that revolved around the meetup club. The dessert diner was a favorite, and every time I would get a coffee, she would steal it and drink from the other side. It was a thing we had. It was a good way to get out of the house as I worked from home, and that could be isolating. But it was not without its problems. One of the older women in the club was a real attention whore and instigator. She really did not like Wayward, who wasn't out there causing her problems. But Wayward did a lot for the club, and it showed up, Ms. Attention Slut. My wife? Well, she had no interest in the club, and she saw it as a chance for her to hang out with her friends down the street or have them over. She thought the thing with Wayward was cute and charming. My wife has 0 jealous bones in her body and cannot stand attention whores. She laughed when I told her the latest Ms. Attention Slut's antics. Oh, and a true redhead's temper. So several years of friendship in the club go by with various amounts of harassment and whispered rumors by Ms. Attention Slut. It was the yearly club planning dinner, and Ms. Attention Slut had had more than her share of box wine. Wayward, who got tied up with a patient and was late, came in after the dinner and gave me a hug. Ms. Attention Slut said in a loud stage whisper to everyone, "Gee, I wonder what Ms. Raccoon would think of that. Maybe someone should tell her." I saw red. I pulled out my phone and speed dialed my wife. "Oh, you have something to say to my wife, do you, Ms. Attention Slut? Let me help you out here." I put it on speakerphone. "Hey, honey, someone here has something to say to you about me and Wayward." "Oh, hand me over to her, dear." And when Ms. Attention Slut tried to say something, Ms. Raccoon let her temper fly. She read her the riot act, mocked her, ripped her up one side and down the other, and told her to keep her nose out of other people's business if she liked the way it looked. She would never hurt anybody, but it sounded like she would, and that was what counted. The club heard it. It grew silent. Ms. Attention Slut was imitating a fish out of water. She was turning even pinker than the wine could account for, and Ms. Attention Slut was imitating a fish out of water, making ah-ah-ah sounds. Then my wife started to laugh, which her laugh is very infectious. Other people started to laugh. Ms. Attention Slut started to really turn pink, then ran out of the room. A 60-year-old woman crying like a toddler. Well, in the spirit of the Tiki Club, here is to you, Wayward, fair winds and following seas. The next one is an entitled people story. I don't know if this belongs in this subreddit, but I couldn't think of anywhere else it would fit. I've been too shy to post about this story for a few years, but I just need to get it off my chest, and I think it's been long enough that no one from my family would recognize it. Also, while I've kind of known for years, I've just recently been diagnosed with autism, but like I said, I was able to pick up on that myself when I realized I was still having temper tantrums at age 21. I have since tried to control the emotional side of my autism, but everyone who interacts with me seems to instantly pick up on the fact that I'm not exactly your typical 20-something-year-old. So as the title suggests, I finally came out to my family as trans, once my coworker made me aware of the trans community, and my gut feelings about myself were actually valid. But my timing couldn't have been more perfect to come out, as it was during the era in human history where toilet paper became the rarest Pokemon, and everyone stayed home and communicated over Zoom. After talking with my coworker about everything, we decided it was best to tell my mom first, as that's who I felt the most comfortable telling. She then told my dad, they both then told my sister, and before you know it, everyone knows. But I wouldn't be posting this if it were that simple. The reactions varied. My mom, dad, and sister were all prepared for me to come out as gay. So they were a little confused, but not really surprised when I said I was a trans woman. Everyone on my mom's side of the family was pretty laid back and just congratulated me and wished me luck on my new journey. But my dad's side of the family, well, as my dad was breaking the news to them, their first thought was he was telling them I had the well-known virus of the time, and were assuming the worst of it. But once they heard I was just coming out as trans, they breathed a sigh of relief that I was still alive and well. It wasn't until they fully processed what my dad told them that we got the reactions I half expected from them. My grandma said, "No matter what, he'll always be my grandson." Like I said, I expected it. She's my grandma. She's known me for over 20 years. She's not going to change. But the older of my two aunts said this was just me trying to seek attention. Now I have no idea where she got that from, as I actively avoid social situations, and even hide in my room while everyone else celebrates my birthday parties for me. I thought that would be the worst response, but oh boy was I wrong. So, after things settle down and the quarantine is lifted, the younger aunt sends me a text asking if she can pick me up so we can chat, and she can try to understand why I feel this way. Seeming like a positive response, I agree, so we set a time and date. After she picked me up, I was expecting her to either take me to her house or a coffee shop somewhere we could sit and chat peacefully. But suddenly we're slowing down on a long, straight road with nothing but tall trees and thick bushes lining the sidewalks on both sides. Automatically, my autistic brain starts coming up with the worst possible scenario. And having just heard of the LGBT community, one of the first things I learned about was how people used to use unorthodox methods to turn us back to normal. So I fully expected to end up in some barn strapped to a chair being forced to watch hypnosis videos designed to make me think I'm a straight man. Luckily, my overactive imagination was way off, and she just parks the car, then we both get out and start walking casually along the stretch of road. She started off by just asking me a few general questions like, "How long have you felt this way? Did someone make you think you're a woman? Are you sure you're not just gay?" You know, standard questions that don't at all make me feel as though this is an interrogation. But knowing we're in the middle of nowhere with no bus stops or landmarks to be able to call a taxi from, I play along and just keep answering these slightly uncomfortable questions as honestly as possible. Once she's done asking me questions, she then proceeds to start trying to find the fixable problem as to why I think I need to be a woman. And this is where I take the deepest, longest sigh I think I've ever had in my entire life. I don't remember everything she said, but here are a few that still stick with me to this day. I think it's because you can't get a girlfriend, so you want to become the girlfriend. You must have felt this way because all the other boys at school always bullied you for not being as masculine as them. You can't be a woman, you must just be gay, or really feminine. I obviously refuted all of her suggestions and told her this is not something that can be explained, but she said that there were no signs of this when I was younger. Now, from her point of view, this is technically true. But I was no idiot when I was a kid. I could very clearly tell how traditional my dad's side of the family was. Men are men, women are women, and son should only be between a man and a woman. So I purposefully created a male persona for whenever I was around that side of the family. The other side didn't really care. I could be as girly as I wanted around them and they never judged me. So when trying to convince me that I'm not trans didn't work, she pulled out what she thought was her trump card. You know, if you become a woman, only lesbians will be attracted to you. I stopped dead in my tracks. Remember the co-worker from earlier that helped me come out as trans? Well, she's a lesbian and I had a bit of a crush on her at the time. So for my aunt to imply that there's some kind of problem with lesbian women, I was done. I didn't care that I was in the middle of nowhere with no transportation. I said, nope, we're done here, then just started walking away. Suddenly, she went from having all the power to backpedaling so hard that I sighed, turned around, then told her that if she wants to continue discussing this, she needs to understand that this is my life and my decision. So she played nice until we returned to the car. The drive back home was a little tense, but still somewhat civil. However, she did return to trying to diagnose my mental condition with other flimsy suggestions. But once we arrived back at my house, before I left the car, she said, "Before you make any rash decisions, you should learn some responsibility first." I don't remember what I said, or if I said anything at all after that. But after she drove away, I thought to myself, I have a full-time job, I pay rent to my parents, I buy my own food, and I help my parents pay for car repairs. What more responsibility could I possibly need to be qualified to be trans? Bearing in mind, I have never been interested in being in a relationship or having any kids. In fact, none of that was ever going to be on the table until I was happy with myself first, and I'm not really a pet owner type of person either. So I'm already familiar with the concept of bills, managing my own money, and having a full-time job. That in itself comes with a huge amount of responsibility. And one day, she took me and my grandma to visit a relative, and I totally forgot I was wearing one of my headbands I used to keep my hair out of my eyes after growing it out. She asked me why I was wearing a headband, and my grandma, who likes to actively avoid me mentioning anything to do with my trans identity, suddenly looked really frustrated. So I just said it's to keep my hair out of my eyes without having to tie my hair back. That's when she brought up having my hair cut, which is a sore subject for me. As being trans in my country, with free healthcare and post-virus, meant that while I was, and still am, waiting to get hormone therapy started, one of the few things I can have control over is my hair. So I've reached a point where I'm too nervous to even go to a hairdresser, in case most of my long hair is actually dead ends that need to be cut off. But I do take good care of my hair despite not getting it cut. I didn't really respond to that, so she just said I can get it trimmed but still keep it long. To which I heard my grandma mumble something under her breath in response, probably about not enabling me. Anyway, that's my story. I'm not looking for advice, but feel free to comment if you've had a similar experience with a family member trying to force their views of your life choices on you while barely listening to your point of view. Anyway, thank you for watching.